In July 1993, an engaged couple vanished without a trace from the rocky shores of Puget Sound. All they left behind was a picnic blanket, a half-empty bottle of champagne, and a single Polaroid photograph that should never have existed. For 3 decades, the case haunted investigators until a devastating storm revealed a hidden cave and a message that changed everything. Subscribe for the full story, because the truth behind the bay will haunt you. Puget Sound, Washington. July 11th, 1993. The storm rolled in without warning, the kind that split the horizon with lightning and turned the calm bay into a cauldron. When the search party reached the outcrop, Sarah Kim's summer dress was still caught in the blackberry brambles, its hem fluttering in the wind. Marco Velez's Polaroid camera, film still inside, sat on the rain-soaked rocks, pointed toward the edge. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no footprints, just their picnic, cold, undisturbed, as if the world had simply pressed pause. But inside the camera, a single photo waited. It showed Sarah and Marco on the rocks, arm in arm, both smiling. But there was something wrong with the background. A figure, blurred by movement, standing at the mouth of the cliffs, where no one should have been. 30 years later, the storm would come again, and with it, the truth. July 11th, 1993. Location: Miller's Point, Puget Sound, Washington. The summer evening clung to the bay like a memory refusing to fade. Sarah Kim ran her fingertips over the frayed edges of a picnic blanket, smoothing the blue and white checks into a patch of sun-warmed grass. The outcrop jutted over the restless water, a hidden place, just far enough from the highway for quiet, just close enough to civilization for the illusion of safety. A gull shrieked overhead. Marco Velez, her fiancé, popped the cork on a cheap bottle of champagne and grinned, teeth bright in the failing light. His face always softened in these moments, the armor he wore for the world slipping just a little, showing the boyish optimism beneath the unshakable calm. "Pour it before you spill it," Sarah teased, brushing a strand of black hair from her eyes. Her voice was gentle, but the tension was there, a tremor beneath the joke. "Si, senora," Marco replied, rolling his eyes. He poured 2 uneven glasses and handed her the fuller one. To us. To not working weekends. To the last quiet Saturday in Seattle before your mother demands a church wedding and we both lose our minds. Sarah snorted. She clinked her glass against his. To one last secret before we belong to everyone else. They drank. The bubbles fizzed up her nose. The air carried the tang of salt and wet stone, the sharp resin of sun-baked pine needles. Far below, the tide gnawed at the rocks, a sound both comforting and ominous. Marco sprawled onto the blanket, propped up on one elbow, camera in hand. He had insisted on the Polaroid. Something analog, he said. For real memories. Sarah watched him load the film with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. She recognized the sign. He was nervous too. She took his hand. "You sure you want to do this?" Marco grinned, but the smile faltered at the edges. "It's just a photo, Sar, and a story for the grandkids, right?" "Grandkids, huh?" she said, rolling her eyes, but the thought made her blush. They'd been together 3 years, engaged 6 weeks. Life was supposed to be opening up, not closing in. He held up the camera. "Smile, or don't. Either way, this is the last you'll ever look this happy before you meet my family." Sarah groaned, but she let him pull her close. She felt the beat of his heart through his t-shirt, steady, fast. She looked into the lens and made herself smile. The shutter clicked. Marco fanned the photo, impatient. The white square began to bleed with color, like a bruise rising beneath the skin. He squinted at it, then laughed. "You look like you want to bolt for Canada." Sarah punched his shoulder, feigning offense. "You'd notice if I was gone. Who else would drag you to the dentist?" He grinned and set the photo aside, but his gaze lingered on the tree line. "Did you hear that?" Sarah tensed. "Probably a deer, or that crazy fisherman Dad warned us about." Marco shook his head. Sounded closer, like footsteps on the rocks. They listened. The world seemed to contract around them. The sounds of the bay swelling, gulls, wind, water, the far-off hum of a boat engine. No footsteps, just nerves. She pressed her lips to his cheek. "Stop scaring me." "Sorry." But his eyes kept straying to the shadows. The last time they'd picnicked here, a pair of teenagers had been caught making out on the other side of the outcrop. Parents, police, the works. "Maybe we're not as alone as we think." Sarah hesitated. "Do you want to go?" He shook his head. "Number not yet." She lay back and watched the clouds march in over the sound, thick, bruised purple at the edges, threatening a storm. "You want me to open the cheese or read your palms?" He snorted. "Cheese first. You're terrible at palm reading." She unwrapped the brie, broke off a piece of stale baguette. The comfort of routine settled over them. Old jokes, shared silence. Sarah reached for the Polaroid again, thumbing through a handful of older photos. Picnics, birthdays, blurry shots from Marco's cousin's wedding. She stopped at a picture from last year. Marco and his father, side by side on this very bluff, both looking away from the camera, faces unreadable. He noticed her gaze. "We can throw that one out." "No," she said softly. "It's a good memory, even if you can't see it yet." He looked away, studying the horizon. "My dad hated this place. Said the sea always takes what you love if you get careless." Sarah snorted. "He sounds cheerful." "Yeah. He was wrong, though. The sea doesn't care. It just exists. We're the ones who lose things." Thunder rolled, low and distant. They finished their meal in fits and starts. Conversation wandered. Wedding details, grad school deadlines, whether Marco would finally quit the warehouse job. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the champagne make her silly, happy, light. But the feeling of being watched would not leave her. She glanced back toward the woods. Something in the gloom shifted. Just a branch in the wind, maybe. But she shivered. "We should pack up." Marco checked his watch. "Sunset soon. Give me one last shot." He set the camera's timer, positioned it on a rock, then grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her to the very edge. She hesitated, staring down at the drop to the water. "Don't!" He squeezed her hand. "I got you. Just smile." The timer whirred, counting down. Sarah forced herself to smile, the sky breaking open with sudden gold as the sun dipped behind the cliffs. Click. The flash briefly blinded her. Then everything happened at once. A branch snapped behind them, loud, deliberate. Marco turned, squinting into the trees. Sarah felt, rather than saw, the movement. A tall, dark shape between the pines. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The world held its breath. Then Marco let go of her hand. He stepped forward, a question on his lips. "Hey, who's there?" But the wind drowned him out. Sarah stumbled after him, slipping on the slick grass. She grabbed his arm. "Marco, let's go, now!" But he was staring, frozen, at the place where the shadow had been. Gone now, if it had ever been there at all. They packed up in silence, hurried and clumsy. The uneaten food tumbled into the basket. The blanket flapped in the wind. Marco snatched the Polaroid from the rock and stuffed it in his pocket. "Let's go," he said. They moved down the trail, hearts pounding, the path twisted and unfamiliar in the falling dark. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, certain she would see someone, or something, following. But there was only wind, and the sound of the tide growing louder as they neared the parking lot. At the edge of the woods, Marco stopped. "Keys?" Sarah fished in her purse, hands shaking. "I had them." She stopped. Her fingers closed around a small, unfamiliar object. She pulled it out. A piece of driftwood, smooth and pale, with something carved into one side. "Help Bay 7 run." She stared, blood roaring in her ears. Marco looked over her shoulder. "Did you put that there?" "No," she whispered. He reached for the keys, started the car. Sarah threw the driftwood into the back seat, her mind racing. The last light of day slipped behind the trees as Marco pulled onto the road. Behind them, the outcrop stood empty. The wind picked up, scattering their footprints, carrying away the only evidence that they'd ever been there. As night fell, rain began to sweep in off the bay, erasing every trace of Sarah and Marco Velez. They would never be seen alive again. July the 12th, 1993. Location, Miller's Point, Puget Sound. The world does not end when two people vanish. The sun still rises, the tide still creeps up the rocky beach, and the seagulls still scream and wheel in the cold blue sky. But in the hours after Sarah Kim and Marco Velez failed to return home, an invisible current of panic began to ripple outward from their absence. Quiet at first, then crashing. Sarah's mother, Mira, made the first call. She tried not to sound alarmed, but it was already after midnight. Sarah's curfew had always been strict, even at 24. Her mother's voice, clipped with worry, left a message on Marco's answering machine, then dialed Sarah's number again, letting it ring and ring. By sunrise, Marco's father was circling the neighborhood in his battered Chevy, windows rolled down, eyes red and raw. He'd called everyone he could think of, friends, cousins, even Marco's old boss at the warehouse. No one had seen or heard from them. At 7:03 a.m., Mira Kim dialed 911. By 8:00, an officer from the Kitsap County Sheriff's Department stood on her porch, notepad in hand, trying to conceal his fatigue behind professional questions. "When did you last see your daughter?" "Yesterday morning," Mira replied. "She said they were going out to the cliffs. Miller's Point. She promised to call." "And did she?" "Number neither of them." The officer made a note. "Did they have any reason to run away? Trouble at home?" Mira shook her head. "Number Sarah isn't like that. She just got engaged. She was excited. Please, just find her." The search began in earnest. An hour later, first came the uniformed deputies, then the volunteer firefighters and local neighbors. By noon, 2 patrol cars and a battered rescue van had gathered at the dirt lot above the outcrop, lights flashing in the clear daylight. They found the car first, a dull silver Civic, its doors locked, windows fogged with morning dew. On the back seat, a single picnic basket. The blanket and food were missing. Marco's Polaroid camera was nowhere in sight. Deputy Bill Madsen ran his fingers over the thin layer of dust on the trunk, then crouched to study the ground. "No sign of a struggle," he muttered to his partner. "But look here, footprints. 2 sets, side by side, leading toward the trail. The footprints were faint in the loamy dirt, washed by the night's rain. They followed them, slow and careful, down the twisting trail toward the outcrop. Brambles snagged at their uniforms. Mosquitoes whined in the still air. On the flat of the rocks, evidence of the picnic remained. A few crumbs of bread, a wedge of cheese and wax paper, the indented pattern of a blanket. An empty bottle of Andre champagne, still sticky with the scent of cheap fruit, rested against a stone. 2 plastic glasses, one cracked, one half full, stood beside it. Madsen snapped photos, glancing up at the horizon. "Looks like they just vanished into thin air." The other deputy, a young woman named Ortiz, shook her head. "Or went for a swim." They walked to the cliff's edge. The drop was steep, 20 feet, maybe more. The tide was out, exposing slippery black rocks and thick kelp. Ortiz shielded her eyes against the sun. If they slipped, we'd find something. Shoes, a bag, blood, something. Madsen grunted, scanning the water below. Get search and rescue out here. Drones, boats, whatever we've got. An hour later, the scene buzzed with activity. Uniforms combed the woods. Volunteers formed ragged lines, and a pair of K9 handlers led their dogs up and down the trail. The K9s picked up a scent near the blanket, but lost it at the tree line. The rain had washed most clues away. A paramedic found the Polaroid camera tucked into a tangle of grass at the edge of the rocks, as if dropped in a hurry. The film pack inside was half spent. The last photo was still fresh, colors bright and edges damp with dew. Deputy Ortiz flipped it over. That them? Madsen squinted at the image. Sarah and Marco, standing on the edge, arms entwined. But something about the photo made his skin crawl. In the background, a blurred figure hovered at the edge of the trees, tall and indistinct, almost a smudge of shadow more than a person. He slipped the photo into an evidence bag. Get this to the lab. I want it blown up. As the morning wore on, Mira Kim and Eduardo Velez arrived at the scene. Mira pressed her hands to her mouth when she saw the cars, the deputies, the yellow tape staked into the ground. She wandered toward the cliff, eyes scanning the water as if expecting her daughter to swim back at any moment. Eduardo approached the lead investigator, Detective Naya Talbot, a woman in her late 40s with steel-gray hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. She listened as Eduardo described Marco's old scars, the sound of his voice, his habit of humming when nervous. He wouldn't run, Eduardo insisted. Not without telling me. He's a good kid. They're both good kids. Talbot nodded, but her face betrayed nothing. We're doing everything we can. Did Marco ever mention anyone following him? Any problems? Eduardo hesitated. He said once that someone kept showing up at the docks, watching. I thought he was imagining things. Talbot made a note. Anything else? Eduardo shook his head, eyes darting toward the tree line. Just find them, please. Throughout the afternoon, searchers scoured the shoreline, combing through driftwood and seaweed. Near a cluster of wind-battered logs, a volunteer, a teenage boy named Luis, shouted for help. Talbot jogged over. Luis pointed to a pale branch, half buried in sand. Someone had carved 3 words in blocky, desperate letters. Help Bay 7 run. Talbot's heart kicked in her chest. She radioed for evidence bags and gloved hands, careful not to disturb the message. The driftwood was fresh, bark still moist, the letters ragged and uneven. Not Marco's writing, but maybe Sarah's. Her mother would later say it looked like her hand. The tide was coming in. Sea foam licked at the rocks, threatening to carry the driftwood away. Talbot photographed the evidence, then flagged the spot for later. She stood there a moment, staring out at the water. What the bay takes, it keeps. By dusk, the search had grown desperate. Police boats trawled the water, casting searchlights over the kelp. Divers in black wetsuits moved along the base of the cliffs, checking every crevice. But the sea gave up nothing. No bodies, no clothes, not even a shoe. At 9 p.m., Detective Talbot walked the trail one last time. She paused at the place where the blanket had lain, staring at the empty space, the champagne bottle glinting dully in the dark. She knelt, pressing her hand to the earth. The ground was cold, unyielding. She felt, for the first time in years, a tremor of fear. Not for her own safety, but for the invisible things that moved beneath the surface of this place. She found the bramble where Sarah's dress had snagged. On a whim, she plucked a thread of blue fabric and sealed it in a tiny plastic bag. As she stood, the wind shifted. It came off the water, sharp and briny, carrying with it the echo of something lost. Talbot stared into the trees, half expecting to see movement, a figure lingering in the growing dark. But there was only the hush of the woods, the distant thunder of waves, and the knowledge that something had slipped away from Miller's Point, leaving nothing behind but questions. By midnight, the official search paused. Flashlights flickered out. Deputies gathered in small circles, drinking burned coffee from paper cups. Families were sent home with promises. "We'll keep looking. Call if you remember anything else." But hope, already fragile, faded with each passing hour. In Sarah's childhood bedroom, Mira sat at the foot of the bed, clutching her daughter's sweater to her chest. She stared at the wall, at the posters of mountains and wild horses, at the photo strip from a summer carnival, at the rotary phone that refused to ring. In a dreamless sleep, the world moved on. The tide came in, erasing footprints. The Polaroid sat in an evidence locker, the driftwood log in a plastic bag. The truth, whatever it was, sank deeper, waiting for the next storm to bring it to the surface. Somewhere out on the bay, the wind howled and the water turned black, as if warning the world. What the water takes, it does not always return. July 13th, 1993. Location: Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. The evidence room at the Sheriff's Department always smelled faintly of dust and ammonia. Detective Nia Talbot stood at the long steel table, blue gloves snapped tight around her wrists. Her eyes scanned the small, sad collection of artifacts from Miller's Point: the champagne bottle, the crumpled blanket, the plastic glasses, the Polaroid camera, the driftwood log with its desperate carving. Every object felt heavier than it should, a weight that pressed against the ribs. She focused on the Polaroid. She'd seen countless photos in her time: mugshots, crime scenes, vacation snapshots pinned up in the break room. This one was different. It didn't want to be looked at. It wanted to be solved. The evidence technician, Danvers, had already dusted it for prints. Nothing but Marco and Sarah's, plus an unreadable partial along one edge. "Developed it right away, boss," he said, handing her the sealed bag. "Colors are still good. You want to take a look?" Talbot nodded. She eased the photo out, careful not to smudge the surface. Sarah and Marco, arms entwined, standing on the edge of the outcrop. The sun had dipped low, painting the world gold. Their faces wore awkward, half-forced smiles. Sarah's eyes glancing away, Marco squinting at the camera. In the background, almost lost in the darkness beneath the trees, was a blur, human-shaped, but wrong, a smear of shadow. There was no detail, no face, no features, just presence. Talbot brought the photo closer to her nose, as if she might sniff out the secret in its chemicals. "You see this?" she said quietly to Danvers. He nodded. "Not a trick of the light. There's someone, or something, there." Talbot flipped the photo over. On the back, in faint blue ink, Marco had written a date and time: July 11th, 1993, 8:21 p.m. Last one for the scrapbook. A line of Sarah's handwriting, small and neat, trailed beneath. "You better not lose this camera again." Talbot exhaled. It was such an ordinary message, it made the whole thing worse. She set the Polaroid down. "Can you scan and enlarge the background?" "I want every pixel." Danvers nodded. "Already on it." She turned to the rest of the evidence. The driftwood log was drying in a plastic tub. Its carved message: "Help Bay 7 run. Stark against the grain." The letters had been cut deep and clumsy. Talbot frowned, thinking of Sarah's mother's assertion. It looks like her hand. But what about the timing? Had Sarah left the log before she vanished? Or was this a message forced from her afterward, her last communication with the world? She wrote a note for later. There were so many loose threads already. A knock at the door. Sergeant Weller stuck his head in, hair wild from lack of sleep. "Lab's ready with the first pass. Want to see?" Talbot nodded, stripping off her gloves. She followed Weller down the corridor to the small photo lab. The technician, a young woman named Julie with red-rimmed eyes, projected the scanned Polaroid onto the screen. It was worse blown up. Sarah and Marco's smiles looked strained, almost frightened. The shadowy figure at the tree line resolved into a suggestion of arms, legs, a head. A person, but more of an absence than a presence. Julie adjusted the contrast, pixel by pixel. Whoever this was, they were moving fast, she said. See the motion blur? The head is turned, body angled toward the couple. You can just make out a hand, here, near Sarah's shoulder. Talbot felt her scalp tighten. Could it be someone running? Julie shook her head. Number more like lurking. Watching. The movement's all wrong. Weller leaned in. Could it be a double exposure? Some old frame bleeding through? Julie hesitated, then shook her head again. Number I checked. This isn't a camera malfunction. This is something or someone who was there. The room grew silent. Talbot stared at the image. Her mind spun through possibilities. A local drifter, a friend playing a prank, a third party lying in wait. Or worse, a stranger, a predator, drawn to this secluded point above the water. She looked at Weller. Any history of trespassers at Miller's Point? Weller scratched his chin. Nothing major. Kids sneaking beers, sometimes drunks from the marina, and, well, that one guy. What guy? Weller's eyes slid away. The fisherman. Everyone just calls him Murrow. He lives in that shack on the far side of the bay. Keeps to himself. A little off, but never caused real trouble. Talbot made a note. Get me his file. Any known priors, complaints, and canvass the area. See if anyone saw someone else that night. Weller nodded. You got it. Julie cleared her throat. There's one more thing. She brought up the metadata from the scan. I ran a filter to pull out background details. Here, see this? She zoomed in on the tree line. Hidden, half covered by brambles, was a strip of faded red. Looks like fabric, Julie said. Could be a jacket or a bag. Talbot's mind flashed to the thread she'd plucked from the bramble. A thin strip of blue, but this was red. 2 people then? Or just a trick of the light? She stared at the ghostly blur, a whisper of red in the dark. Run it for color analysis, she said. Maybe we'll get lucky. Julie nodded. Already working on it. Talbot left the lab, her head aching. In the hallway, she paused by a vending machine, watched the spirals of candy bars inch forward and stop, over and over. The world outside was moving on, but here, in the fluorescent hum, time was suspended. She thought of Marco's father, his trembling hands, the hope still flickering in his eyes. She thought of Mira Kim, silent and hollowed out, her life divided into before and after her daughter vanished. Talbot pushed off the wall and made her way to her office, evidence bag in hand. She sat at her desk, turned the Polaroid over in her fingers, and let her mind wander. Who was in the background? Why was there no sign of struggle? Why that message, run, on the driftwood? And what was Bay 7? She reached for the file on Marco Velez. His work history, school records, old citations. Nothing remarkable. A good student, steady job at the warehouse, a handful of minor run-ins, mostly speeding, nothing more. But tucked at the bottom of the folder was a statement from 6 months earlier. A report from a security guard at the marina. Subject approached by unknown male, mid-40s, described as scruffy, watching the docks. When asked to leave, the man claimed to be looking for his son. Left without incident. No ID provided. Talbot scribbled a note. The fisherman, Murrow, or someone else. She called the marina and left a message for the security guard. She added Murrow's name to the list of interviews. She flagged the color analysis request. Every lead was a thin thread, but she knew from experience that one thread, pulled hard enough, could unravel the entire knot. Just before noon, her phone rang. Danvers from Evidence. "We finished cleaning the camera," he said. "You'll want to see this." Talbot scribbled a note. The fisherman? Murrow? Or someone else? She called the marina and left a message for the security guard. She added Murrow's name to the list of interviews. She flagged the color analysis request. Every lead was a thin thread, but she knew from experience that one thread, pulled hard enough, could unravel the entire knot. Just before noon, her phone rang. Danvers from Evidence. "We finished cleaning the camera," he said. "You'll want to see this." Talbot made her way back to the evidence room. Danvers showed her the Polaroid camera, now pristine. He held out a Ziploc bag with 3 undeveloped photos. "Found these jammed in the mechanism. Looks like the camera malfunctioned." Talbot took them, feeling the weight of chance. "Can you develop them?" Danvers nodded. "Already did. They're drying." He laid out 3 fresh Polaroids on a white tray. The first was a blurred image, trees and darkness, indistinct. The second showed the picnic blanket, empty, wine glasses askew. The third, Talbot felt her heart seize, was a close-up of someone's face, taken by mistake, too close to the lens to be clear. A man's stubbled chin, a flash of an eye, a strand of black hair. Marco's probably, but in the bottom corner, a patch of red fabric. The same color as in the background of the first photo. Talbot stared at it, adrenaline surging. It meant something. She just didn't know what, yet. That night, in her apartment, Talbot poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, Polaroid photos spread out on the coffee table. The city outside was alive with distant sirens and summer thunder. She listened to the storm, watched lightning fork over the bay, and wondered if it was the same storm that had come the night Marco and Sarah disappeared. She picked up the first photo, tracing the figures with her fingertip. Sarah and Marco, arms linked, staring into the camera, a world of unspoken fear beneath their smiles. Behind them, the shadow. She whispered into the silence, "Who are you?" There was no answer. Only the rumble of thunder and the certainty that what had happened on that outcrop was far from ordinary. And somewhere, beneath the black water and the empty sky, the truth waited, patient as the tide. July 14th, 1993. October 1993. Location, Bremerton, Washington. The days after Sarah and Marco's disappearance stretched and blurred, a feverish monotony of hope, dread, and exhaustion. The official search shifted from urgent rescue to grim recovery. Volunteers dwindled. Search dogs grew tired. The bay remained silent, keeping its secrets. Detective Talbot felt the pressure growing, every dead end pressed against her chest. Local news ran nightly updates, each less hopeful than the last. Public interest surged and crashed. By August, the missing couple became background noise to everyone except their families. But then, 2 weeks after the last sighting, the first letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope, postmarked from Seattle. No return address. Sarah's mother, Mira Kim, found it in the mailbox wedged between bills and an advertisement for a church fish fry. Her hands shook as she slid it open at the kitchen counter, the afternoon sun falling through lace curtains. Inside was a glossy postcard of Puget Sound at sunset, the same craggy outcrop where Sarah and Marco had vanished. Across the back, in neat block letters, was a message. "Remember Bay 7. Watch the tides." No signature. No explanation. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was denial. Some sick prank, surely. But she traced the letters, certain suddenly that they were her daughter's handwriting. She called Detective Talbot. When Talbot arrived, Mira handed her the card, palms sweating. You see? It's Sarah's writing. I know it. She used to write notes for me, grocery lists, reminders for her brother. Always these block letters, always so neat. Talbot examined the card, her own pulse quickening, She compared the letters to a sample from Sarah's old notebooks. The slope, the spacing. She couldn't dismiss the resemblance. But why send it to you? Talbot wondered aloud. If Sarah's alive, why not call? Mira shook her head. Maybe she can't. Maybe she's watching us, but she's not free. Talbot filed the card as evidence and ordered it dusted for prints and DNA. Results came back inconclusive. A partial fingerprint, not in any known database, and traces of skin cells too degraded for identification. 2 days later, another postcard arrived. This time at the Velez home. A photograph of the marina at dawn, the water silver and empty, boats listing gently at their moorings. On the back, the same block letters. Look where the water meets the rock, it's not over. Marco's father, Eduardo, showed the card to Talbot the same afternoon. This isn't Marco's writing, but maybe he asked someone to send it, or maybe... He broke off, unable to finish the thought. Talbot took both postcards to the lab. They were identical in make, printed at a local drugstore, but the prints were wiped clean. The only thing tying them to the missing couple was the message, and the uneasy feeling that someone was toying with the families. 3 weeks passed. August melted into September. The bay was fickle that summer, thick fog rolling in, then days of harsh, brassy sun. Talbot's investigation churned, sucking up time and patience. She re-interviewed everyone who'd been near Miller's Point that weekend. Teenagers, fishermen, campers. The man in the shack, Murrow, proved elusive, sometimes gone for days at a time. When finally tracked down, he claimed to know nothing, his eyes as hard and glassy as stones. I saw nothing. I don't watch people, they watch me. Talbot didn't trust him, but had nothing to hold him on. One afternoon in mid-September, Mira brought another envelope to the police station. Her hands were trembling, voice pitched high with hope and terror. "It's different this time," she said. "You have to see." The envelope held a photograph. Another glossy print of the bay, this one darker, rain-drenched, with an out-of-focus smear near the lower corner. A scribbled line ran across the back, 3 by 3 by 3. "If you love me, listen." The message meant nothing to Talbot. She brought the card to Mira's home, sat in the tidy living room with Mira, Sarah's younger brother Alex, and a table cluttered with family photos and untouched tea. Alex, a boy of 16 with tired eyes and a stubborn jaw, turned the card over and over in his hands. 3 by 3 by 3. He frowned. "Sarah and I used to play number games. It could be a code, or maybe a place. Or a time," Mira said. 3 o'clock, maybe. 3 days, 3 weeks. Talbot made notes. She pressed for more. "Did Sarah ever mention Bay 7 to you?" Mira shook her head. "Number." She loved the water, but she wasn't a strong swimmer. She'd never have gone out on a boat alone. Alex's brow furrowed. "There's a Bay 7 on the old tide charts," he offered. "It's not a real bay. It's a marker. A buoy, maybe." Talbot checked the records. Bay 7 was indeed a navigational marker, a rusted buoy half a mile off the main pier, used mostly by crab fishermen and kids skipping stones. She requested a dive team check the area. Divers found nothing but silt and old crab traps. If a message was meant to be found there, it was gone. Through October, the cards kept coming, never more than a week apart, always in the same blocky hand. Sometimes they featured a photo of the outcrop, sometimes the marina, sometimes just blurred shots of water and sky. The messages grew stranger, less hopeful. "The water hides everything. I'm not alone. Look behind the red door. The lights at dawn. Follow them." Each card brought a surge of desperate hope and a crashing wave of frustration when the clues led nowhere. Talbot set up a sting at the local post offices, watching for anyone mailing similar cards. Nothing. She checked the local photo shops, no new prints matching the cards. Someone was careful. perhaps mailing them from out of town, or using old photos from years past. The press caught wind of the letters and ran a story. Missing couples' families taunted by mysterious postcards. Tips poured in. Sightings of Sarah and Marco from as far away as Idaho and Oregon. All dead ends. Privately, Talbot wondered if the cards were a cruel prank, or worse, the killer playing a game. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the voice behind the messages was, in some way, Sarah's. Her stubbornness, her hope, the way she'd always hidden meaning in the everyday. The families endured. Eduardo left the porch light burning every night. Mira stopped sleeping, her life structured around the Daily Mail delivery. Alex withdrew into himself, poring over tide tables and maps, searching for a pattern. Each new card was cataloged and analyzed, but none cracked the case open. Talbot kept the first postcard on her desk, tucked under her notepad, a reminder maybe of hope, or maybe just of how quickly the world can slip away. In late October, a final envelope arrived. No card this time, just a single black and white photograph. Sarah, alone on the outcrop, looking back over her shoulder, wind in her hair, expression unreadable. In the bottom right corner, scratched into the emulsion, 3 words. I was here. Talbot stared at the photo long after the families had left for home. The office around her grew dark, quiet, the noise of the world receding. She pressed her thumb to the glossy surface and whispered a promise she didn't believe. I'll find you. Outside, the tide pressed in, relentless and indifferent, and the secrets of the bay slipped farther from reach. October 1993. Location, Miller's Point, Puget Sound. Wind scraped along the cliffs, whistling through the pines, rattling loose an old fisherman's wind chime, a hollow, metallic sound, brittle as old bones. Detective Talbot braced herself against the salt, stiff air as she picked her way down the muddy trail leading to the one home that overlooked the whole bay, the shack of Everett Murrow. The locals called him Murrow the Hermit. In a town where everyone knew everyone, he was the exception. His shack clung to the headland like a barnacle, shingled with mismatched boards, a tarp fluttering where a window should have been. Nets and crab pots hung in tangles beside the door. A string of battered plastic buoys marked the only path through the brambles. Talbot stopped, breathing in the scent of rain, wood smoke, and something faintly chemical beneath. The place gave her the creeps, but she'd been stalling too long. Every time the postcards arrived, every time someone whispered about shadows at the edge of the trees, her mind circled back to this house. She rapped on the door. Nothing. She knocked again, louder, a shuffling sound. The door opened just enough for a pale, watery eye to peer through the gap. "Sheriff again?" the voice croaked. "I already said my piece." "Detective Talbot, I need to ask you a few more questions, Mr. Murrow." She kept her tone soft, but left no room for argument. A grumble, a scrape of chain, and the door swung open. Murrow looked older than his 60-odd years. Face carved by weather, skin sallow, beard stained with nicotine. He wore a frayed army jacket and socks, but no shoes. Talbot caught a whiff of whiskey and something fishy. "Don't like people poking around," he muttered, waving her inside. "Not much left worth stealing." Talbot stepped into the cramped living room. Nets hung from the ceiling. Bottles filled with cloudy liquid lined the shelves. The only light came from a kerosene lamp and the window, where streaks of rain wandered down the glass. Murrow slouched in a battered armchair, pulling a faded blanket over his knees. "Ask your questions, then go." Talbot stayed standing. "You said before you saw nothing the night Sarah Kim and Marco Velez vanished." He shrugged, staring at his hands. "Didn't see, didn't hear. Neighbors say you're out on the rocks at night, fishing sometimes, drinking." He met her gaze, eyes sharp beneath his drooping lids. "This place gets loud at night. Wind, water, animals. Can't hear your own thoughts, let alone a pair of lovebirds getting lost. Talbot changed tack. You ever see anyone else out there? Anyone watching? Strange boats, lights on the bay. Murrow hesitated. His lips twisted, as if tasting words before saying them. People come, people go. Summer, you get city kids camping. Sometimes see boats at the old fish house dock. But the bay takes more than it gives. Always has. She studied him. Did you ever see anyone near the outcrop in July? He scratched his beard. Saw a car parked late, heard voices, laughter, then arguing, man and woman. Maybe two men. I don't listen, not my business. Talbot's pulse jumped. What night? He squinted. Could have been the night they vanished. Or the night after. All the same to me. She pressed. You sure it was two men? Don't know. Voices carry strange here. Sometimes the wind talks. He tapped the side of his head. Sound like ghosts, half the time. Talbot softened her tone. Did you ever talk to Sarah? Or Marco? He shook his head. Kids never bothered me. Marco, maybe once. Came around last spring, asked about fishing spots. Never saw him again. Talbot glanced at the cluttered shelves. An old Polaroid camera, dusty, cracked, sat beside a box of tattered photographs. She picked up the camera. Yours? Murrow's eyes flickered. Was my wife's. She took pictures before she left. I keep 'em for luck. She thumbed through the photos. Faded shots of sunsets, gulls, rain-streaked windows. Then, a picture of the outcrop. The rocks smeared by fog. In the corner, a figure, could have been anyone, stood at the water's edge. Mind if I borrow this? Talbot asked. Murrow shrugged. Ain't nothing left in them for me. She tucked the photo into her file. If you remember anything, no matter how small, let me know. He didn't answer, just stared at the lamp, lost somewhere in the reflection of glass. Back in town, Talbot walked Main Street under the drizzle, the sky an endless bruised gray. She stopped at the hardware store for coffee, burned and bitter, but warm. Inside, the conversation turned as soon as she entered. Detective, any news on the missing couple? An old woman asked from behind the counter. Nothing yet, Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Crane leaned forward, lowering her voice. People say the cliff's cursed. My daddy used to tell stories, folks vanishing, boats smashed on the rocks. You think it's the water? Talbot forced a tired smile. I think people vanish for reasons, Mrs. Crane. We just have to find them. Another customer, Mr. Russell, nodded. Lost my brother in '72. Went out with friends, never came home. They found the boat 3 days later, empty. Talbot made a note. Anyone ever find out what happened? He shook his head. Town's got a memory, detective. Some things just slip away. At the library, Talbot combed through old newspapers. Headlines whispered of disappearances. August 1972. Youth vanishes from fishing party. April 1979. Local couple missing after storm. June 1985. Hiker lost near Old Dock. The pattern was undeniable. A pulse beneath the town's polite surface. Each time the same patch of coast. Each time no answers. She photocopied the articles, spread them across her desk that night, side by side with the Polaroids and postcards. The outcrop appeared again and again. A silent witness. Her mind drifted. What if the water didn't just take, but kept? What if the bay itself was part of the story? An accomplice, shaping the town's fate. By the end of October, rumors swirled. Some blamed Murrow, the strange man on the cliffs, alone and bitter, living with ghosts. Others whispered about old debts, jealousy, and curses. Every new clue seemed to twist the case further from clarity. The only constant was the bay, vast and unmoved, swallowing the moonlight, erasing evidence with every tide. One afternoon, Talbot visited Sarah's family with a new question. She brought the old Polaroid from Moreau's shack and showed it to Alex. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. Alex stared, brow furrowed. "That's Sarah's jacket, the red one she got for her birthday last year. She took it everywhere. I haven't seen it since the night she left." Talbot felt a chill creep up her spine. "You're sure?" Alex nodded, voice trembling. "Positive." Back at her office, Talbot pinned the photo above her desk, a ghost in red, standing at the edge of the world. It was proof, however thin, that Sarah had made it to the water's edge. Proof she, or someone, had been seen by more eyes than just Marco's. But it was also a warning. The past here was layered, buried beneath silt and silence, visible only in flashes, like a red jacket glimpsed between the trees. That night, as Talbot prepared to leave, the phone rang. She answered on the third ring, her voice tired. A man's voice, husky, nervous. "Detective? I saw something. That night. I didn't want to get involved, but I can't stop dreaming about it." Talbot straightened. "Who is this?" A pause. "I was on the water, near Bay 7. Saw lights. Flashlights, I think. Heard shouting, a woman crying. Then, nothing. It went quiet. Too quiet. Can you come in and make a statement?" The caller hesitated. "I'll think about it. I just needed someone to know." The line went dead. Talbot sat in the dim light, watching rain beat on the window, listening to the distant hiss of the tide. The town was alive with secrets, the past bleeding into the present, the bay holding its breath. Somewhere out there in the fog and the water and the memory of old stories, the truth waited, and the man on the cliff watched it all. November 1993. Location: Puget Sound. Miller's Point. The first winter storm arrived with no warning. Rain lashed the coast for 3 days straight, pounding the cliffs into slate and turning every trail into a ribbon of mud. Detective Talbot's office windows rattled all night with wind. In the morning, news of the storm's damage swept through town. Downed lines, battered docks, boats torn from their moorings. But it was the phone call from search and rescue that would change everything. "Detective, we've found something you need to see. It's at the base of the cliffs, near Bay 7. Low tide washed out a cave. There's remains. Old, maybe, but you'll want to be here." Talbot's pulse hammered as she sped out to Miller's Point, wipers slapping the windshield, sea spray tossing up against the rocks. At the scene, a knot of uniforms clustered near the collapsed edge of the cliff. Tape fluttered in the wind. The tide had receded just far enough to expose a dark mouth in the stone. A shallow cave barely visible from above, slick with algae and debris. 2 divers in wetsuits crouched beside their gear, faces pale. One held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a piece of jawbone, human, unmistakable. The other diver pointed into the cave. "There's more inside. Bones, cloth, maybe some personal effects. Could be a burial or a dump site." Talbot slipped on gloves, ducked low, and followed them into the gloom. The air inside the cave was thick with rot and salt, a fetid cold that crawled along the skin. Her flashlight swept the ground, revealing the truth in pieces. Ribs and vertebrae tangled with driftwood, scraps of faded fabric, blue, red, gray. The remains of a shoe, a plastic locket shaped like a seashell. One of the divers whispered, "How old, you think?" Talbot shook her head. "No way to know yet. But this isn't new. Some of these bones have been here for years." A forensic tech crawled in behind her, camera flashing. Talbot collected every detail, photographed the layers of silt, the arrangement of bones, the debris scattered along the back wall. She bagged the locket herself, fingers shaking. The team worked in silence for hours, fighting the ticking clock of the incoming tide. By afternoon, the cave's secrets had been pulled into the daylight. A partial skeleton, the bones of a child, remnants of at least 2 adult bodies, their remains entwined and almost indistinguishable after years beneath the water. Among the debris, Talbot found more. A cracked watch, a set of wireframe glasses, a corroded key ring. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Rumors flew. Talbot kept her answers tight and factual. "We've recovered multiple sets of human remains, likely from different time periods. It's too early to say if they're related to the current missing persons case." Privately, her mind reeled. Were Sarah and Marco down there, hidden among the bones? Or had the bay given up victims from an older tragedy? For days, the case consumed the town. The families waited by the phone, dreading the call but needing the answer. Eduardo Velez spent his afternoon sitting at the marina, staring at the water. Mira Kim, always composed in public, broke down in Talbot's office. "You have to tell me, is my daughter dead?" "We don't know yet," Talbot said. "The remains are being tested. It could take weeks." Mira pressed her fists to her eyes. "I just want to bring her home." Talbot promised everything she could not control. The forensic pathologist worked overtime. Dental records ruled out some of the victims. The child was not Sarah. The watch and the glasses were traced to a couple reported missing in 1979. But the third skeleton, an adult woman, was a harder case. The bones were broken, weathered, with few clues to identity. When the results finally arrived, they delivered a partial answer. The woman was not Sarah Kim. She was likely white, in her mid-30s, gone for at least a decade. The child, a boy, matched the description of a missing local from 1985. The other adult, a man, was older, possibly from the 70s. None were Marco. Talbot's frustration grew sharper. The cave was a graveyard, but it was not the answer. With the discovery, pressure on the department mounted. The press circled, hungry for connections. Serial abductor? 3 decades of disappearances linked to Miller's Point. Speculation blossomed in every diner, every gas station. Talbot heard whispers wherever she went. One night, as she crossed the grocery parking lot, a stranger in a battered jacket stopped her. "Detective, you ever think maybe the missing don't want to be found? Maybe some secrets belong to the water?" Talbot stared at him, searching for mockery, but found only fear. He shuffled away, vanishing into the drizzle. She brought her notes to Sarah's family, careful to manage hope. Alex, haggard but resolute, asked the question no one else dared. What if Sarah and Marco are still alive? Maybe they saw something, ran, and someone else got caught. Talbot wanted to say yes, but the postcards, the coded messages, the sense of being watched, they offered only riddles. "I can't promise anything, Alex," she said softly. "But the search isn't over." A week later, another twist. A local crab fisherman, Stan Bixby, called in, claiming to have found something tangled in his pots near Bay 7. Talbot met him at the dock. Stan handed over a sealed plastic bag containing a wallet, waterlogged but intact. Inside was a faded driver's license. Marco Velez. Talbot's heart lurched. She checked the contents, old receipts, a photo of Marco and Sarah, a cryptic handwritten note. "If I'm gone, don't trust the man in the red raincoat." M.V. Talbot pressed Stan for details. "Pulled it up about 30 yards from the cave. It could have been drifting for years. I almost missed it, but the chain snagged." The wallet was sent to the lab. The note was preserved, dried, photographed. It was the first concrete sign Marco had been alive, at least for a while, after the day he vanished. Talbot tracked down every man in town with a red raincoat. None matched the partial print from the Polaroid. She canvassed the marina, the bars, the bait shops. Some folks remembered seeing a man in red, lurking near the cliffs the night of the storm. but no one knew his name. The pieces refused to fit. But something was coming together. A pattern or a warning, just out of reach. On the night the first winter snow threatened the coast, Talbot sat in her car above Miller's Point, watching the lights of boats blink across the bay. She replayed the evidence in her mind. Bones in the cave, none belonging to Sarah or Marco. The red jacket, the shadow in the Polaroid, the old camera in Murrow's shack, the cryptic postcards, the wallet and the warning about the man in the red raincoat. She stepped out into the biting wind, listening to the hiss of the tide against the rocks. The sea whispered its own story, a history of the lost and the waiting, of secrets drowned beneath the surface. But the truth, she knew, was closer now. Somewhere in the cold, shifting water, the bay was giving up its dead, but not all of them. Not yet. December 2023. Location, Miller's Point, Puget Sound. 30 years slipped away in a moment. One storm brought Sarah Kim and Marco Velez to the world's attention. Another would break the silence and expose secrets buried deep beneath the tides. It was a December night, days before Christmas, when the wind came howling in off the Pacific, fiercer than anything the town had seen in years. Rain hammered roofs. The old pines groaned, snapping brittle branches into the bay. The power flickered out just before midnight, plunging Miller's Point into darkness. The next morning, locals gathered to survey the damage. Mudslides cut off the main road. Driftwood and trash choked the marina. But it was a group of amateur explorers, teens home for the holidays, armed with phones and flashlights, who made the discovery that would change everything. They were following a path washed open by the storm, tracing a slick, rocky cut along the base of the cliffs. One boy, Owen Harper, led the way. He nearly fell when the rocks gave out beneath his feet, sending him sprawling against a moss-slicked wall. His light caught on something unnatural, a jagged opening, newly exposed just above the high tide line. "Check this out," he called. The others crowded around, shining their lights into the mouth of a hidden cave. The opening was tight, half-collapsed, stinking of seaweed and old decay. But inside, the cave widened. They found the first clue almost immediately, a battered backpack half buried in silt. On the side, faded letters spelled out K-I-M. Phones came out snapping photos. One girl, Kenzie, unzipped the bag. Inside were waterlogged notebooks, a Polaroid camera, a rusty flashlight, and a bundle of letters wrapped in a deteriorating scarf. Owen's voice trembled. "We need to call someone." Word spread quickly. By noon, the site was crawling with police, reporters, and curious neighbors. Detective Nia Talbot, now gray-haired but sharp as ever, returned to Miller's Point, heart pounding with a mix of dread and desperate hope. The cave had changed since she'd last seen it, the entrance blown wider, the contents washed forward by the flood. Technicians swept through, collecting evidence. Talbot watched as they bagged everything, the backpack, the camera, the letters, even the crumbling scarf. One officer approached, face serious. "We found something else, Detective. You'll want to see this." Inside the cave, among the debris, they'd unearthed another set of bones. This skeleton was smaller, possibly a woman's, possibly decades old. Beside it, a Polaroid photograph sealed in a cracked plastic case. Talbot took it, hands shaking. The image inside was badly faded, but she could make out a woman's face, older but unmistakable. Sarah Kim. The scene at the station was tense. The town buzzed with rumors. They found her. She was alive all these years. There was someone else in that cave. Talbot sat in her office, studying the evidence spread across her desk. The backpack, marked with Sarah's name, contained a notebook wrapped in plastic. Inside, Sarah's handwriting covered every page, scrawled in increasingly erratic lines. Talbot paged through the entries, reading fragments. The water's rising. I can hear them above. I'm not alone. Marco is gone. They took him. I have to hide. If anyone finds this, please tell my family I tried. There's another entrance. I hear someone moving at night. Never answers, just watches. Talbot's breath caught on that last line. For years, she'd wondered if the stories about the man on the cliff were nothing more than local myth. But here, in Sarah's own hand, was confirmation. Someone else had been there. Maybe Murrow. Maybe someone unknown. She called in forensics. The bones in the cave would be tested, but Talbot knew the odds. If it was Sarah, the case would close. If not, the mystery would deepen. The Polaroid camera yielded more clues. Technicians carefully pried open the brittle film cartridges, developing what they could. One photo showed Sarah, older, haggard, holding up a hand-lettered sign, Bay 7, Dawn. Another was an accidental double exposure, Sarah's face and the interior of the cave, but behind her, the blurred outline of another figure. Tall, male, features impossible to make out. The letters were water-damaged but partially legible. Most were addressed to Sarah's mother and brother. Don't trust the man in the red coat. If Marco comes back, tell him I waited. I hear boats, but I'm too weak to try. There was one addressed simply to Naya. Talbot unfolded it, heart thudding. Detective Talbot, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't let them forget me. Don't let them forget Marco. The man who took us, he wears a mask, changes his voice. He isn't alone. Don't trust anyone who offers help out here. Please. I hope someone finds us. I hope my family forgives me for leaving. Talbot pressed her hand to her mouth. The case had haunted her entire career. Now, the truth was bleeding out. Messy, tragic, incomplete. Within a week, forensic reports came in. The remains in the cave were not a genetic match to Sarah Kim, but were a close match to another missing woman, gone from the area in 1998. The backpack and Polaroids, however, were undoubtedly Sarah's. There was more. The cave's walls were marked with hundreds of scratches, names, dates, desperate messages. Sarah K. 1993. Marco, gone, waited. Don't trust him. And, carved over and over, Bay 7. Among the cave debris, forensics found DNA not just from Sarah, but from at least 2 unidentified males. One was a partial match to Marco Velez. Another matched the unknown man in the red coat. From earlier reports, a man whose identity remained elusive. Talbot went home that night and stared at the photos and journal pages arrayed on her table. Sarah's voice echoed in her head. I hope someone finds us. The next morning, she called Alex Kim, now in his 40s, married, living 3 hours away. She told him what they'd found. There was no joy, only a muted relief, a bone-tired thankfulness that some answers had finally surfaced. Thank you for not giving up, he said quietly. For all of us. But Talbot didn't feel finished. The cave had offered clues, but not the whole story. Marco's fate remained unknown. The shadowy presence described by Sarah was still nameless, faceless, a threat that lingered in the corners of memory and community. That night, another storm rolled in. Rain battering the window glass, wind shrieking down the chimney. Talbot sat at her kitchen table, listening to the water, and thought about all that had been lost. And all that, at last, was returning to the light. December 2023. Location: Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. For 3 decades, the phrase Bay 7 had haunted the files of Miller's Point. It appeared in frantic scribbles, in postcards and Polaroids, in desperate messages scratched into stone and driftwood. But until the storm revealed Sarah Kim's backpack and letters, no one had truly known what it meant. Detective Nia Talbot sat in the cold light of the evidence room, surrounded by stacks of old case files and new forensic reports. The buzz of voices and police radios from the hallway faded to a distant hum. In front of her, spread out like the pieces of a puzzle, were every Bay 7 reference collected over 30 years. The driftwood message from 1993 postcards mailed to Mira Kim and Eduardo Velez Polaroids with Bay 7, scrawled in the margins journal pages from Sarah's notebook. The phrase underlined and circled again and again. Talbot stared at the evidence, frustration knotting her stomach. She needed a code breaker, someone who knew Sarah, someone who understood her games and hidden meanings. She called Alex Kim. He arrived that afternoon, bundled against the wind, his face thinner, eyes sharper. He greeted Talbot with a hug that surprised them both. "Let's see what she left us," he said quietly. They sat at the long table, working through the stack of artifacts. Alex read aloud from one of Sarah's journal entries, written in frantic pencil. "If you find this, Bay 7 is the answer. Remember our game, Polaroids, timestamps, it's all in the order." Alex frowned, thinking. "When we were kids, Sarah and I used to hide notes for each other. The clue was always in the timestamp, hours, minutes, even the order of photos. She loved ciphers." Talbot nodded. "You think it's a code?" "Has to be. Let's look at the postcards and Polaroids together." They spread out the original postcards. Puget Sound sunsets, the marina at dawn, the outcrop in rain and fog. Each had a message on the back, and each was time-stamped, sometimes down to the minute. Alex sorted them in chronological order by postmark, then cross-referenced the Polaroid timestamps found in the camera Sarah left behind. "There's a pattern," he said. "Look, the first postcard is postmarked 7:07 a.m. The first Polaroid is stamped 7:07 a.m. too. Every time the numbers match, the message is a warning." Talbot scanned the notes. "Remember Bay 7, watch the tides. Look where the water meets the rock, it's not over. 3x3x3. If you love me, listen." Alex wrote the times out, then pulled out Sarah's notebook for the matching entries. "See this?" He pointed to a journal page, dated July 1994. "If the light is on at Bay 7, don't stop. If it's off, go. He only comes when the light is on." Talbot's eyes narrowed. "What light?" Alex shrugged. "The only lights out there at night are the marker buoys. Bay 7 is the rusted one. Nobody ever repairs it, but sometimes it flashes, like someone's replaced the battery." Talbot felt the weight of possibility. Sarah was sending messages from captivity. Someone was signaling. Maybe for her, maybe for someone else. Alex flipped through the journal again, searching for more. Here, she wrote about hearing footsteps at night, seeing lights outside the cave. Sometimes she thought it was Marco, sometimes someone else. She was terrified to go out unless the buoy was dark. Talbot scanned the evidence log for maintenance on the buoys. In the last 3 decades, Bay 7's light had been officially out more than a dozen times, but local fishermen often reported seeing it flicker to life in storms, or when the fog rolled in thick. She called the harbor master. "Is there any way someone could turn that light on or off remotely?" He hesitated. "Not officially. But if someone knew the wiring, or used a handheld spotlight, easy, nobody would notice, especially during storms." Alex pieced together a timeline, overlaying the postcard's timestamps, the Polaroid photos, and known reports of the light being visible from shore. "It's a pattern," he said. "Sarah sent her first message when the light was off. After that, every time she warned us, the light was on. Maybe she thought help was coming, or maybe she was warning us to stay away." Talbot's mind raced. If the light at Bay 7 was a signal, on meant danger, off meant safety. Someone out there had used it for years, as a lure or a warning. She pulled the last postcard, the one mailed to herself in 1997. "If you're reading this, it's not too late. Bay 7, wait for dawn. The truth is in the light." She stared at Alex. She wanted us to see something at dawn. That night, Talbot drove to Miller's Point, Alex riding shotgun, both silent with anticipation. Rain lashed the windshield as they reached the end of the road, the headlights sweeping over wet gravel and black water. The sky was clearing, dawn a few hours off. They waited, windows fogged, watching the marker buoys blink in the dark. Hours dragged by, cold seeping into their bones. Then, just before sunrise, a thin yellow glow sparked to life on Bay 7. The buoy's light, dead for weeks, burned steady for 5 minutes, then blinked out. Talbot turned to Alex. "Someone's out there, right now." She radioed for backup, officers moving to the docks and along the cliffs. They swept the area with spotlights, scanning for boats, footprints, anything. But the bay was empty, the marker light now dark. Dawn broke over the water, gilding the bay in cold gold. Talbot stared at the horizon, heart hammering. Alex exhaled. She was right. The answer is in the timing. As they drove back, Talbot mulled over the coded messages, the warnings about the light, the untraceable figure in the Polaroids, the whispered references to the man in the red coat. Each clue had been left for them like breadcrumbs, but the path still bent away from certainty. At the station, Talbot assembled her team. "We need surveillance on Bay 7, cameras, infrared, whatever we have. And I want every unsolved missing persons case along this stretch of coast re-examined for mentions of lights or signals." She sent divers to check the buoy for tampering. They found new wiring, a waterproof switch, and, hidden in the base, an old tin with a waterlogged cassette tape inside. The tape was rushed to the lab. Audio techs recovered fragments. Sarah's voice, muffled, whispering, "If you find this, I'm still here. Bay 7 dawn. Don't trust the man who comes when the light is on. He isn't who he says he is. Marco, if you hear me, run." Talbot listened again and again, shivers crawling up her arms. The voice was raw, desperate, alive. That night, Talbot wrote in her own notebook. Sarah was trying to save us, not just herself. The code wasn't a plea. It was a warning. And the man who watched the bay is still out there, waiting for the right light. The investigation shifted. The focus now on the watcher, the lures, and what, if anything, could still be alive in the silence between tides. January 2024. Location: Miller's Point, and Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. Detective Talbot had always believed that every case, no matter how cold, could be cracked with persistence and luck. But now, 3 decades into Miller's Point's tangled mystery, she felt the grip of something older, a story that didn't want to be solved. The station buzzed with new urgency. Patrols swept the bay nightly. Divers combed the waterline near Bay 7. The surveillance team logged hours of foggy footage, boats, otters, the bobbing shadows of buoys. Sometimes, just after midnight, the Bay 7 marker light would flicker to life, then go dark again, always just out of sync with the tide. The old tin cassette tape from the buoy haunted Talbot. She'd listened to the scratchy recording a dozen times, Sarah's whispered warnings, the edge of panic in her voice. The plea to Marco, "Run," echoed in her mind as she sorted through old files. What disturbed Talbot most were the matching patterns. Other cases, years apart, contained fragments almost identical to Sarah's story. 1979. A missing hiker left a journal mentioning a man in red who walked the rocks at dawn, waving a flashlight. 1985. A local fisherman vanished after reporting odd lights near Bay 7. 1998. The last known message from a missing woman was a note. "Don't follow the light at the buoy. Wait for sunrise." Each time the same cold presence, the watcher, the man in the red coat. Never seen for more than a flash, never caught by police. Talbot spread the files on her office wall, mapping every sighting, every coded warning, every vanished soul. The pattern spiraled out from Miller's Point, the epicenter of secrets. The new year brought fresh leads. A tourist snapped a photo of the cliffs at sunrise. Nothing unusual, until a technician enhanced the shadows. There, among the brambles above the bay, stood a tall figure in a red jacket, half-turned, face obscured by the hood. 2 days later, a fisherman reported seeing a small boat slip away from the buoy just before dawn. On board, a lone man in red. Talbot showed the photo to Alex Kim. He stared at it for a long time. "That's not Murrow," he said. "Murrow's dead. I read about it online. He passed away last winter." "Then who is this?" Talbot asked. Alex's face darkened. "It's someone new, or maybe the same man, just never aging." Talbot didn't believe in ghosts, but the evidence was mounting for something more than coincidence. She called in a forensic artist who created composites from witness memories, old photos, and the enhanced image. The result was chilling. An ageless, narrow face, high cheekbones, a blank, almost mask-like expression beneath the red hood. Several old-timers at the marina claimed to recognize him. "He's always been here," one said. "Since I was a kid, he'd walk the docks after storms." Never spoke. A background check on men fitting the description in the region came up empty. No records, no driver's license, no property deeds. The man was a ghost, alive only in rumor and glimpses. Talbot changed tactics. Instead of chasing the watcher, she studied his patterns, how he moved, where he was seen, when the light at Bay 7 was used. Alex helped her piece together a timeline. "Look, he only shows up during storms or at dawn, and the light is always a warning, never a beacon. I think he's chasing people away, not luring them in." Talbot stared at the wall of evidence. But if he's warning people, why do they disappear? Why leave messages saying not to trust him? Alex shrugged. "Maybe he isn't alone." Sarah wrote, "He isn't who he says he is. Maybe there's more than one watcher." The theory made Talbot's skin crawl. Multiple predators. One who lured, one who warned, or both sides of the same mask. The bay's secrets ran deeper than bones and driftwood. That evening, Talbot returned to Miller's Point with Alex. They climbed the cliffs as twilight faded, watching the waves crash against the rocks. The bay glimmered with the last light of day, the marker buoys bobbing in the dusk. They waited in silence, shivering as the wind picked up. The town behind them was hushed, its streetlights flickering on one by one. Far off, an engine coughed, then faded. Then, at precisely 5:14 a.m., the same time stamped on Sarah's last Polaroid, the Bay 7 buoy flared to life, yellow against the black water. A faint beam swept the cliffs. Talbot squinted, heart pounding. On the ridge, a shadow shifted. Someone stood among the trees, a tall, thin silhouette in red. Alex whispered, "That's him." Talbot's radio crackled. Patrol units closed in from both sides. They advanced carefully, shining their flashlights, calling out warnings. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. When the officers reached the spot, they found only an empty coat hanging from a low branch, red, rain-soaked, pockets empty. No sign of the man himself, but inside one pocket, tucked in a plastic bag, was a Polaroid. Sarah's handwriting on the back. "Don't wait for the light. Find the door." Talbot stared at the note, mind racing. Find the door. Not a buoy, not a cave, a door. An entrance hidden in plain sight. Alex gripped her arm. The cave had a second entrance. Sarah wrote about it, but nobody ever found it. Talbot radioed the search team. "Fan out. Check every old shack, every collapsed boathouse, every hidden cut along the bay. We're looking for a door, hidden, covered, something that doesn't belong." The team spread out as dawn broke, scouring the cliffs and forest. After 2 hours, a rookie deputy called in. "I think I've got something." Talbot and Alex rushed to the spot. a patch of blackberry brambles along a washed-out gully above the cave site. The deputy pointed to a slab of concrete half buried in mud, barely visible beneath the thorns. They dug carefully, uncovering a rusted iron hatch, its handle slick with moss. Alex's voice shook. "This has to be it." Talbot called for backup. The hatch groaned open, revealing a cramped, stone-lined passage that sloped downward toward the water. The air was damp, sour with decay and secrets. She led the way, flashlight trembling. The tunnel twisted beneath the cliffs, walls carved with dozens of names, hundreds of scratches, Sarah's included. At the end, the passage widened into a chamber littered with debris. Old clothes, scraps of rope, an empty Polaroid cartridge. On the far wall, a faded red coat hung on a hook. Below it, a line of Polaroids. Sarah, Marco, others Talbot didn't recognize. Lost souls from 3 decades of disappearances. Alex whispered, "It's a shrine." Talbot's heart hammered as she photographed everything. There were more clues here, more warnings, scraps of letters, more code to break. But for the first time, she felt the bay's silence had shifted. The Watcher's lair was empty, abandoned, but not erased. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the bay in light. Officers fanned the area, but found no trace of the Watcher. Talbot stepped into the morning, the cold air sharp with salt. She turned to Alex, voice steady at last. "We're closer. We know how he moved, how he watched. We know where he hid. We just don't know who he is, or if he's truly gone." Alex nodded, tears in his eyes. "But Sarah's voice led us here. She's still saving people, even now." As the tide rolled in, washing footprints from the shore, Talbot realized this was only the beginning. The Watcher had vanished, but his shadow stretched farther than the cliffs, and the truth would not rest until every missing soul had a name. January 2024. Location: the hidden tunnel, Miller's Point. Flashbulbs burst in the wet dark as forensic teams crowded the narrow stone-lined tunnel beneath the cliffs. Detective Nia Talbot pressed against the damp wall, notebook in hand, watching as evidence bags filled with Polaroids, scraps of fabric, and handwritten notes were catalogued one by one. The red coat from the hook was handled like a holy relic, zipped into a clear case, its pockets emptied with gloved care. Alex Kim stood at her side, silent, trembling with cold and memory. He traced the names carved into the stone. Sarah K., 1993, Marco Feuille, 1993, Allison M., 1985, Tommy R., 1979, and dozens more. Some faded into moss, some sharp as if cut yesterday. The chamber itself felt both claustrophobic and reverent, a sanctuary built for secrets. In the flicker of work lamps, Talbot saw evidence not just of one killer, but of an entire system. Rope, old lanterns, torn blankets, children's shoes lined neatly on a shelf. In the corner, beneath a rotten tarpaulin, they found more bones, at least 2 sets, based on the tiny skulls. Talbot's chest ached as she realized how many families had come here for answers that would never be whole. A forensic tech carefully pried Polaroids from the wall. Most were warped with time and damp, but a few survived. Sarah, bruised but defiant, holding a crude sign that read, "No light tonight." Marco, arms slung around her shoulders, both blinking into the glare. A pale little girl in a blue raincoat, date stamped 1986, name unknown. There were even recent ones, blurry and distorted. Teens, hikers, fishermen, faces frozen in moments of confusion or fear. Proof that the Watcher's work had continued well past Sarah and Marco. In the center of it all was a battered metal box, locked with an old combination dial. Talbot called for a toolkit, and within minutes, a detective had cracked it open. Inside, more letters. each addressed to a family by name, as if waiting for the day the truth would surface. She read aloud the topmost letter. To whoever finds this, we tried to leave a record. The watcher is not alone. There's another, sometimes a woman, sometimes a man. They change clothes, voices. Sometimes they argue, sometimes they just watch. We tried to help those who came after. I hope it was enough. S.K. Talbot's voice wavered. Alex bowed his head, shoulders shaking. She never stopped fighting, he whispered, even in the dark. Above ground, the news traveled quickly. Within hours, the tunnel's discovery made national headlines. Secret shrine found in Bay cold case. Police link 3 decades of missing to watcher lair. Families descended on Miller's Point. Some stood weeping at the edge of the search zone. Others waited for word in the firehouse, clutching photos and prayer beads. DNA samples were taken from every bone and object. The task would take months, maybe years. But finally, there was hope for answers. For Detective Talbot, it was the culmination and the beginning of a new kind of search. She worked late into the night with a forensic team, matching journal entries, Polaroids, and names, piecing together a macabre timeline of disappearances. She found connections between the watcher's coded warnings and known storms, missing persons, and the flickering of Bay 7's light. What haunted her most, though, was the evidence of complicity. Multiple footprints, mismatched gloves, hair from different sources. The watcher hadn't worked alone. Sometimes there had been 2. Sometimes even 3. Was it a family, a cult, or just the consequence of evil, recruiting what it needed, generation after generation? By week's end, a breakthrough. A latent print from the metal box matched a man who had died in prison in 2010, an itinerant drifter once questioned about the 1985 disappearance, but never charged. Another print, much fresher, matched an unsolved break-in at the marina the year before. Talbot gathered her team. This isn't over. The watcher's lair was a hub, not an endpoint. Someone's still out there, maybe even using the site as recently as last year. Alex, now raw-eyed but resolute, asked, "What about Sarah and Marco?" Talbot set a hand on his shoulder. "We have their handwriting. We have Sarah's last Polaroid. We know they were here. We just don't have the final answer yet." Alex nodded, swallowing. "Thank you for not forgetting her." That night, after the search teams cleared out, Talbot stood alone in the chamber. The damp, mineral air pressed close, as if the walls themselves wanted to speak. She looked over the names, the faces, the echoes of children's laughter that would never be heard again, and she promised to the empty space, to the bay beyond the stone, to every grieving family, "We will name you. We will not let you disappear." A breeze from the water found its way into the tunnel, and somewhere, just outside the circle of her flashlight, a new set of footprints waited to be found. By week's end, a breakthrough. A latent print from the metal box matched a man who had died in prison in 2010, an itinerant drifter once questioned about the 1985 disappearance, but never charged. Another print, much fresher, matched an unsolved break-in at the marina the year before. Talbot gathered her team. This isn't over. The watcher's lair was a hub, not an endpoint. Someone's still out there, maybe even using the site as recently as last year. Alex, now raw-eyed but resolute, asked, "What about Sarah and Marco?" Talbot set a hand on his shoulder. "We have their handwriting. We have Sarah's last Polaroid. We know they were here. We just don't have the final answer yet." Alex nodded, swallowing. "Thank you for not forgetting her." That night, after the search teams cleared out, Talbot stood alone in the chamber. The damp, mineral air pressed close, as if the walls themselves wanted to speak. She looked over the names, the faces, the echoes of children's laughter that would never be heard again. And she promised, to the empty space, to the bay beyond the stone, to every grieving family. We will name you. We will not let you disappear. A breeze from the water found its way into the tunnel, and somewhere, just outside the circle of her flashlight, a new set of footprints waited to be found. Late January 2024. Location: Kitsap County Sheriff's Department / Millers Point. The discovery of the Watcher's Shrine sent shockwaves through Millers Point and far beyond. News vans clogged the narrow coastal road. Vigils sprang up at the cliffs, candles flickering in the night wind. Families from as far as Idaho and California arrived, clutching hope and photos and the terrible need for closure. At the Sheriff's Department, Detective Nia Talbot moved between press conferences, forensic briefings, and private rooms where she met with mothers, brothers, and grown children of the missing. Each conversation left its own weight, a fresh scar. She learned their names, their stories, the small details that kept the dead alive in memory. DNA results trickled in. The first match came for the child's bones found beneath the tarpaulin. Tommy R., gone since 1979. His family, now scattered across the country, finally had a place to grieve. Next, a skull with a faded pink hair ribbon. Allison M., vanished in 1985. 2 more Polaroids yielded names from the 1990s. One by one, the faceless became known. But Sarah Kim and Marco Velez remained elusive. Their handwriting, their belongings, even a partial DNA match to Sarah on old cigarette butts, all confirmed they'd been in the chamber. Yet neither full set of remains was found. For Talbot, the mystery circled ever tighter. Alex Kim became a constant presence. He sifted through the evidence, cross-referencing Sarah's journals with missing persons lists. "She was mapping it out for us," he said. "She left codes for every child, every lost soul who passed through here." A breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A retired harbor worker combing his attic after seeing the news found a battered journal from 1994. He'd rescued it from the water near Bay 7 and kept it out of morbid curiosity. Inside, Talbot found the missing link. A set of coordinates, painstakingly penciled by Sarah. The next morning, Talbot, Alex, and a team of officers followed the GPS to a collapsed boathouse upriver, overgrown and nearly forgotten. There, hidden in the debris, they uncovered another entrance. This one sealed with rusted bolts and a battered plank. Inside, the air was thick and foul, but beyond the broken timbers, beneath layers of mud and rotting canvas, they found the final answers. 2 sets of remains. A man and a woman, arms still linked. Polaroid photos confirmed it. Sarah and Marco, lost but together to the end. Talbot wept as she stood in the ruined boathouse, the wind keening through the cracks. Alex crouched beside the bones, tears streaking his face, whispering, "You're found now. You can come home." The days that followed were a blur of sorrow and relief. The town came together for a candle-lit memorial, faces old and young, hands joined in a chain that stretched from the cliffs to the shore. For the first time in 30 years, the names of the lost echoed over the bay. Talbot spoke, her voice clear but trembling. "We cannot erase what was done here, but we can remember. We can give names to the lost, and we can promise this darkness will not return." After the ceremony, Alex pressed Sarah's last letter into Talbot's hands. "You kept your promise. You brought her home." Talbot didn't answer. She only nodded, letting the silence say what words never could. In her office, surrounded by files and Polaroids and a wall of names finally complete, Talbot wrote her last report. She listed every discovery, every match, every family notified. At the end, she added a line not for the file, but for herself. "Sarah's courage saved more than herself." Her voice carried across decades, lighting the way home for all the others. When she finished, she closed the file and turned off her desk lamp. Outside, the winter wind battered the windows. But somewhere out there, the bay was still and quiet, its ghosts at rest at last. February 2024. Location, Millers Point, Kitsap County Sheriff's Department. The bay thawed slowly as February turned, the endless gray broken at last by brief bands of winter sun. In the silence that followed the investigation, Millers Point began to heal in small, almost invisible ways. Fishermen repaired their battered boats. Children returned to the playground at the end of the cliffs, laughter chasing away the last chill. The Watcher's lair had been emptied, the bones claimed, the shrine sealed with concrete. Still, the water never gave everything back. Detective Nia Talbot drove the coast road one final time, her badge in the glove compartment, her official notebooks packed into a cardboard box. The investigation was over. Her work, 30 years of searching, was finished. The headlines faded, but the town was forever changed. Talbot stopped at the new memorial, a weathered stone set in the park above the cliffs, in memory of the lost. 1972 to 2024. Below, a list of names, no longer anonymous, no longer just numbers. There were flowers, Polaroids, and a child's toy car set carefully on the stone. Alex Kim stood beside her, hands jammed in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. He'd come alone. His parents, worn by years of grief and waiting, had returned to California. They watched the ceremony by video call, voices breaking as Sarah's name was spoken aloud at last. Talbot let the silence fill the space between them. She would have liked this, Alex said quietly. She always wanted to be remembered, not pitied, not forgotten. She saved more than herself, Talbot replied. She saved others. She saved this place. Together they stood as the sun burned through the mist, lighting the stone and the water below. The crowd thinned, people drifting back to their cars, their lives, the routines interrupted by tragedy. Weeks passed. DNA identifications continued, bringing new closure and sometimes new pain to families who had long since given up hope. The police department fielded calls from all over the country. Old cold cases were re-examined. Not every answer could be found, but the act of looking mattered. It was proof, finally, that someone cared enough to keep searching. One rainy evening, Talbot visited the empty station. She found herself standing by the evidence room, looking through the glass at the last box of belongings. Sarah's journal, Marco's wallet, a faded Polaroid camera. She pressed her palm to the glass. "You're home," she whispered. "You're not lost anymore." Life returned in fits and starts. At the marina, crab pots clattered and boat engines sputtered. A new generation of kids dared each other to sprint the length of the cliffs at dusk. Sometimes, at the edge of the water, Talbot caught the flash of a red coat in her peripheral vision, but always it was just a local, or the wind moving through the brush. She spent her first days of retirement walking the old trails, breathing the sharp air, letting the ache of the case unwind from her bones. Strangers sometimes recognized her and pressed her hand, thanked her for answers, for hope, for remembering. She never said much in reply. It was enough to know the silence was lifting. On her last day in town, she drove the empty roads one final time, stopping at every place the search had led her. The marina, the cliffs, the boarded-up shack of the late Everett Murrow, now just a broken pile of timber and memory. She scattered wildflowers at the water's edge, a final gesture for all those still unnamed, all those still lost somewhere between the tides. That evening, as dusk fell and a faint mist curled over the bay, Talbot stood at the top of the cliffs. The marker lights bobbed on the water, steady and harmless now. Behind her, the town glowed warm in the gathering dark. She closed her eyes and let the wind carry Sarah's words to her. Words she had found scrawled in the last page of the journal. "Even when no one is looking, I am here. Even when I am gone, I am not lost." Talbot smiled, tears hot and clean as sunlight. She turned from the water and walked home. For the first time in decades, she felt the return of quiet, not the silence of mystery, but the peace that comes after a long search ends. The bay, at last, was still. June 2024. Location: Miller's Point, Puget Sound. The days grew long as summer claimed Miller's Point. The town, once infamous for its shadows, softened under the golden haze of June. Tourists returned for the first time in years, drawn by the view, the history, and the new memorial on the cliffs. A place for names, for photographs, for whispered prayers. Sometimes at sunset, children played tag along the path above the water, their voices bright. No one feared the marker lights anymore. The old myths had faded, replaced by stories of survival and rescue. But when the fog rolled in thick off the bay, locals still watched the horizon, remembering all that had been lost and found beneath these tides. On a warm evening, Alex Kim came back alone. He parked by the playground, carrying flowers and Sarah's faded journal, and made his way to the stone memorial. He knelt in the wild grass, tracing his sister's name with careful fingers. He spoke softly. "You came home, Sarah. You brought us all back." A hush settled, broken only by gulls and the distant rattle of crab pots. Alex opened the journal and read a line aloud, one that Sarah had scribbled in the darkness, meant for whoever would listen. "Don't wait for the light. If you have hope, you can always find your way." He smiled, tears shining, and set the flowers at the stone. As dusk settled, the marker buoys blinked alive across the bay. Farther out, Bay 7's light glimmered, no longer a warning, just a steady pulse on the water. Families strolled along the pier, their voices calm. Alex lingered a moment longer, then turned for home, feeling the weight of grief lightened by the years, and by the courage that endures, even when the world tries to forget. Detective Nia Talbot, now retired, watched the news from her small kitchen in Silverdale. She saw photos of the memorial, recognized faces of families she'd come to know. Sometimes she dreamed of the bay, the fog, the tide, the glint of a red coat in the trees. She woke with her heart pounding, but the fear was gone. The ghosts, she felt, had finally settled. She kept a Polaroid on her refrigerator, Sarah and Marco, laughing on the sand, arms thrown wide to the wind. On the back, Sarah's handwriting, "For whoever is looking, don't give up. I am not lost." Talbot made tea, stepped outside, and let the early summer air wash over her. In the quiet, she thought of all the voices that had called out from the darkness, and all those, at last, who had been heard. At Miller's Point, another generation of children chased kites along the cliffs. Parents called them home for supper as the sky burned pink and gold. The light at Bay 7 shone steady, a beacon not of warning, but of memory, a promise that the lost would never again go unnamed. And somewhere, carried on the wind, a child's voice echoed from long ago, "I am here. Even in the dark, I am here." The bay, once haunted by silence, now whispered only peace,